Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Luigi Naggett. Today we are going to be talking about how the public sector is reigniting employee engagement and creating a culture of learning. We already have over 100 attendees today, so it's going to be a very informative session, and I'm very excited that you're all here to cover this material today. So some quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded. It will be available on NEOGOV's website as well as posted on the NEOGOV community. Presentation will run about 50 minutes. There'll be about 40, 45 minutes or so of content, and I'll be jumping into our live demo environment to show some of the features that we have in both Perform and Learn. And we have allocated about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So definitely feel free to be engaged throughout the entire broadcast and webinar, ask questions in the questions pane, type them in the questions bar. Even feel free to raise your hand. We'll love to call on you and hear some of your voices today. And then definitely participate because we do have about 8 or 9 poll questions that we have throughout today's webinar. All right. So this is me again. Name is Luigi Naggett. I've been with NEOGOV for about 6 years now. I joined in our customer success department. I've implemented most of our products inside Onboard, Perform, and Learn. I've been the product manager for Perform a couple years ago, and then recently switched over and was the product manager, or is the product manager now for Learn. And so I oversee both Perform and Learn at NEOGOV. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart today, which is why I am leading the webinar. That's me looking very tan after a summer vacation last year, so still miss that tan. Moving on. Here's our agenda for today. First, for you folks who are not familiar with NEOGOV, I'll just give sort of a brief introduction on who we are, and then really dive into the material. Mainly, what is the goal for performance reviews, why assessments have been criticized, and then really how do you adapt your performance management to really satisfy today's workforce and their needs. With a lot of experience speaking to a lot of our public sector and higher ed customers, we really have a lot of trends that they're really doing right now to really make performance management more effective and really tying it with a culture of learning to really increase development as well as engagement in our workforce. And then at the very end again, we'll have questions. So a quick introduction about NEOGOV. We're the leading provider for an integrated HR, payroll, and talent management solution for the public sector. We serve over 6,000 organizations, and we really have a suite of products that cover the full employee life cycle. So, we started out with governmentjobs.com for attraction. We have Insight for recruitment. We launched onboarding once you have those new hires. And we're really going to be talking a lot today on both development and retention using our Perform and Learn modules, as well as we now have a suite of products for administration for your processes, for various processes you have in your organization, as well as time and attendance and payroll and just general HR. So, goals for performance reviews. So ostensibly, there are 4 goals that organizations have in mind when they're conducting performance reviews. They really want to assess individuals, departments. They want to use evaluations to really drive better performance and the development of those departments and teams. And we also use evaluations to really drive organizational goals, as well as departmental goals and even professional goals for your employees as well. And especially in the public sector and higher education, we also know that performance reviews are vital to really document and justify employee decisions. So if you have any disciplinary actions, if you have any sort of promotions, if you are tying evaluations to pay increases, you do know the need to really make sure that your performance evaluation process is airtight and everything is documented. So all of these are extremely valid and critical to any organization's success. So why then has there been so much debate around their effectiveness? So there's been a lot of chatter over the years, especially in the private sector, about abolishing evaluations completely, that they're not truly effective, they're not really accurate. And I think that's very much true also. I think you would probably think so in the public sector based on your own organizations. So here's a quote from Gartner. They are sort of a leading global research and advisory firm. The concept of abolishing the annual performance review has been discussed, adopted, reversed, reinstated, going back and forth, modified many times across thousands of organizations over the past 50 or more years. So we're certainly not talking about any new ground here. This is an ongoing debate. Part of this webinar is to really understand, what are the really challenges and pain points of the evaluation process, and how can we extract the intrinsic value and really promote that to our workforce, so they continue to see the value in performance, management and really learning development. So Gardner identified some common performance management challenges. So they had 4. First was delayed feedback is counterproductive, delaying corrective actions. So again, if you don't have continuous feedback and you're waiting for the very end of the year, what does that really solve? If you're waiting until the very end of the year to provide that feedback to an employee, any sort of corrective actions you could have taken throughout the year have now been delayed and most likely ineffective. The feedback with a performance score puts more focus on the score, especially obviously if it's a number. So I've heard this actually from several of our customers that they're trying to move away from a scored rating system because rather than focusing on the feedback of performance review and what they can improve on and what their strengths are, you have a lot of employees comparing notes with one another and wondering why someone was a 3.17 and they were a 3.07, and really focusing on the actual number rather than the feedback behind that number. Insufficient focus on meaningful coaching and employee development. This is a huge one. You have managers who sometimes are not well trained yet to be a good, effective coach and a manager who focuses on continuous feedback and giving accurate feedback on the spot. So they're not really good coaches and they don't know how to really develop their employees. They're focusing mostly on what their employees did wrong rather than grooming them and developing them to how they can excel and really unharnessing sort of that potential for their employees. And then finally, for Gartner, they've also realized that appraisals are often needlessly complicated, very time-consuming, and often result in demotivated employees. Obviously, for your employees, if they're only hearing from their managers once a year, and it's mostly criticism about all of their weaknesses, that can be pretty deflating for a lot of our employees. And it doesn't really keep them engaged and really doesn't want to keep them. It really hurts your retention rates at your organizations if this is the process that you're currently following right now. I do want to add to this our own customers. So last year in 2018, we traveled across the country over 15 areas for what we called city tours. And during these city tours, several of our NEOGOV staff actually asked these same questions to our customers. What were their main pain points and challenges in the performance management? And here's what they said. They said around 6 to 7 things that sort of came up as big themes. Really, there was no incentive to complete evaluations on time or at all. So unless you're tying performance evaluations to, let's say, a step increase or a merit increase or possibly to a promotion, there was really no incentive to complete evaluations on time. This was a big one. Managers are not being fully honest, or they're giving just very generic, even sometimes inappropriate feedback. So by the time it gets to the employee, maybe it hasn't even gone through your desk in HR. You don't know what the manager is putting in there. They could be putting in some absurd statements that are not vetted out before it actually reaches the employee. Oftentimes, we've also heard that managers really want to avoid difficult conversations. So even though there are performance issues, they will not write that on the evaluations. And even in the times when evaluations are tied to pay, managers are actually really worried. They don't want to ruin their team's chances of getting a pay increase by putting in critical feedback. They don't understand sometimes, or even employees don't understand, that sometimes meeting expectations, you're still qualified for that step increase. It's really about development that's the issue rather than making sure that they have the highest ratings. And honestly, managers have a difficult time substantiating their ratings. So they're not going to be really critical and they're not going to be overwhelming with praise because they have to justify why someone is exceeding expectations or giving a rating of a 4 or a 5. So with that said, they're just taking the easy way out and they're not really giving all of the feedback to really make sure it's an accurate, holistic representation of the employee's performance. Again, this one also came out overwhelmingly. Evaluations are just too long and time consuming. Managers dread it, they hate it. They try to find ways to skirt filling out the evaluations. You and HR are always trying to chase after them as well because they just don't like this process. They don't understand necessarily that this is one of the critical components of being a manager, is to actually make sure that they are doing these evaluations. And then because managers aren't really doing as best of a job and they're avoiding those difficult conversations throughout the year, the employees are pretty surprised once they actually receive their evaluations. They think they've been doing an excellent job, but they haven't really been meeting with their manager to really get ongoing feedback. So by the time they do get their evaluations, they're either upset or disappointed because a lot of their accomplishments weren't praised, or a lot of the feedback maybe was so recent on what happened the last couple of weeks, or was overly critical and just focused on mistakes and weaknesses. So, again, they get dejected from this process. And inefficient routing. The last two are very much specific to HR and a paper-based process. We heard from a lot of customers that one of their main challenges is just making sure that the evaluations end up in the right places, making sure they don't reach the employees before HR has had a time to vet them, making sure that they actually go through the proper channels for approval before they reach the employee. And finally, in a paper-based process, they don't have enough transparency. So there's not a lot of visibility on tracking and completion, especially if you have several departments. If you're decentralized, you just hope that the department heads are issuing out the evaluations and making sure they're completed on time, but you have no visibility on your end to really see what's going on in the process. So we set a lot of these challenges and pain points. So our first poll question of the day is, get ready for it, it's a multi-select. So which challenge or challenges resonate most with you and your organization? Based on everything that we've covered so far that Gartner has identified, as well as what you have witnessed as well, what we've heard from our own customers. Is it that the evaluations are too long and time consuming? Are managers really providing questionable feedback, meaning it's not accurate, it's possibly inappropriate, they're sort of taking the easy way out, they're not really being truly honest? There's not enough focus, let's say, on development and strengths. Everything is focused on the past. Everything is focused on weaknesses, but not enough focus on the future and how to actually grow and develop your employees. Is it just the inefficient routing and completion, that administrative side? You don't see enough transparency on the evaluations. You don't know what the statuses are of the various tasks. Or potentially, is it other? So if you're writing other, we would love to know what other pain point or challenge did we miss. If you're voting for other, feel free to put that into the questions pane just so we know what other is. So we have about over 140 attendees so far already. We have about 75% of our audience voting. So I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share the results. I love this because this is the entire focus of the webinar. Most everyone said 67%, not enough focus on development and strengths and growth. And then followed by 58% said, managers are not really giving the best type of accurate feedback on the evaluations. They're giving inappropriate or just inaccurate or not fully formed feedback, as well as just evaluations are just really long. They're tedious, they're time consuming, and there's not enough routing and completion. So thank you very much for that. I personally, before we continue, would like to really know right now, what currently best describes your current performance evaluation process as well. So this one's a single select question. So just so we know who's out there today joining our webinar, what would best describe your current performance evaluation process? Is it paper-based? Do you see high completion rates, greater than 90%? Do you have a paper-based process? Decent completion rates, at least it's more than half, anywhere between 50 to 90. Is it also still paper-based with low completion rates, less than 90% or less than 50%? Or do you have an online process with either high completion rates or lower completion rates than 90%? We'd love to know the sort of the makeup of our audience here, because that'll definitely help drive a lot of the material that we're going to cover today. All right, so give a few more seconds here for voting. We have two sort of neck and neck. Who's going to come out on top? Close down the poll, share the results. So it was pretty close, neck and neck again. 28% said it was paper-based, decent completion rates, anywhere between 50 to 90, followed very closely by it was online with higher completion rates. Usually there is a correlation between an online process and higher completion rates, so greater than 90%. And then sort of like almost like a three-way tie between sort of the other options. All right, go ahead and close that poll. See if I have the poll questions for you. Oh, and then another quick poll question as well. Again, one of the main pain points, this first one that you see on the screen here, there's no incentive to complete evaluations on time or at all. So I would love to know, do you currently tie evaluations to pay, either a step, merit increase, or promotions? Are you allowed to withhold, let's say, a step increase or a merit increase unless a performance evaluation is completed? Or possibly you are not allowed to do that. They're going to get their step increase regardless, based on their contracts. So let us know. This is pretty interesting. What we see, we have a big audience, 150 folks now, and pretty evenly split. So I'm just go ahead and close down the poll results and share them. Pretty close, almost 50-50. 54 said yes, but 46% of you said no, which is probably why you have that main problem that there's not a lot of incentive to complete evaluations on time if you're not able to tie it to something that's sort of important in your organization to make sure that there is incentive to complete those. All right. So knowing all of these performance management challenges, this is what sort of Gartner said. So in response to all of these perceived shortcomings, organizations are trying to find ways to improve. Obviously, you can't completely reinvent your performance management process overnight. I think that's unrealistic. But what are small ways you can do to start adopting a more forward-looking process that's centered around coaching? It's centered around fostering something that's more forward-looking, that's development-focused, strengths-based, and growth-oriented. And honestly, did not plan this, but development focused, strengths based, growth oriented, 67%. That was the highest vote getter on what you'd really like to see in your performance evaluation process going forward. So the majority of organizations are definitely in agreement. So this is some feedback from Deloitte from a research report they had in 2017 on global human capital trends, that the redesign of performance management is definitely picking up speed. So most of your executives, nearly 80%, really rate it as a high priority, with 38% calling the problem very important. So it's definitely on the forefront now of making sure that we are trying to redesign what is performance management. So with that said, we're going to go through 7 trends that are really shaping the link between performance management and learning and development. We're going to see here, and we're going to sort of demonstrate some areas where, out of these 7 trends, again, it may be difficult to try to do all of them at once. So see what resonates with you the most and see what potential actions you can take to maybe improve in one or more of these 7 areas. We see these as trends really improving the landscape, and we know that several of our own customers are trying to do these more frequently, and they've definitely seen improvements as well on their end. So the first one is, I would say, probably the biggest one, that continuous performance management. You really want to make sure that there's communication between your managers and employees throughout the year. The biggest challenge and pain point is having an annual evaluation, not necessarily having just an annual evaluation, because I think it's difficult to move away from that so quickly, but only having one conversation in the entire year about the employee's performance. Imagine what happens over 12 months, 52 weeks, 365 days, and all of that being distilled into a 1-hour conversation at the end of the year that may or may not drive this employee's trajectory in your organization. So what we try to advocate for is have more performance conversations throughout the year. You don't necessarily have to have a formal evaluation process that's quarterly, but you do want to have more positive conversations centered around the employee's goals, what they want to accomplish, any sort of developmental opportunities. It gives you time to make corrective actions piecemeal throughout the year rather than dumping all of the areas that the employee has to improve on at the very end of the year. So just having more scheduled check-ins and timely feedback. Again, these don't have to be very formal. They can be very informal with some conversations throughout the year. And you really want to make sure that that feedback is more specific. It's based on observations. It's based on actual things that the manager has seen, rather than sort of overheard or seen, or just general feedback like you're doing a great job, or I'd like to see more improvement. What are some specifics around why you're doing a great job? We want to make sure that employees are motivated and feel engaged, and the best way to do that is for managers to really meet with them more regularly and, honestly, give them a little bit more positive feedback. Think about times when you've received a compliment. How did that make you feel? Did that motivate you to want to instill that behavior going forward? Make sure that you're going to repeat that behavior versus only getting criticism constantly. How did that make you feel conversely as well? So it's the same thing for managers and employees. If managers are giving that note of encouragement more frequently throughout the year, they have more engaged employees. So the next thing that I want to share are some stats that we got from two various sources. The first one on the left you see is from SAP. It's really asking how often do employees want feedback from managers? There's a little bit of a focus here on millennials because, as we know, they are a growing part of our workforce. And you see here that annually is pretty low. The majority really want feedback monthly or at least quarterly. And you see that if you're a millennial, if you're a younger person, you probably want feedback even more frequently. So even more as weekly or monthly than even quarterly. So there is definitely a demand and a need for having these conversations more. And if you look at the right-hand side, notice what happens to how motivated employees feel, how engaged they feel in their work whenever they get feedback from their manager. If you go to the very bottom of the list, once a year or less, the percentage of employees who are engaged are only 15%, 8% only feel motivated, whereas that really increases dramatically with the frequency of feedback. So if you go to, a few times a year, a few times a month, even a few times a week, see how dramatically the percentage of engagement and motivation really works. And imagine how much more that can increase if the feedback received from the manager was positive, focusing on their accomplishments and their strengths rather than focusing on their weaknesses. So in that same Gallup report from 2017 that you saw on the right-hand side, this was also a quote in the report that I found very, very telling. So in the last 7 days, I have received recognition or praise for doing good work. That statement alone is responsible for a 10 to 20% difference in productivity because, as everyone, we love, positive sort of affirmations. When you feel great, you're more motivated to do a better job. So if you're receiving that praise and feedback on your accomplishments from your direct manager, you're that much more willing to sort of step up and be more engaged and, be more motivated to accomplish something for your team and your department and your organization. The second trend that we sort of see, if we have our managers meeting with their employees on a more regular basis, naturally they're going to reduce their recency bias. Recency bias is if you're working on an evaluation, you are struggling to finish it on time, so you are only just going to remember anything the employee did possibly in the last few days, maybe in the last couple of weeks. But try to recall something that you did or an interaction you had with either your manager or your direct report 7 months ago. Can you remember all the details specifically of that interaction from 7 months ago? What if you try to remember something that you had an interaction with a colleague maybe 2 months ago? While you may know the details a little bit more, still might be a little bit hazy. So with continuous feedback, which was the first trend, you naturally have a way to reduce recency bias because you're making sure that you're logging all of these instances throughout the year and you're not focusing on the feedback that just happened within the last couple of days. What if the employee was underperforming but all of a sudden just did an amazing job that last week? Or conversely, they were a really, really high performer throughout the year and you really just had a bad week. That 1 week could really influence a manager's perception when they're completing that review if it's only done once a year and there's only one opportunity to give feedback. So the next slide here is grooming employees for growth. So when you have more continuous conversations and managers and employees are really talking more about performance throughout the year, it naturally opens the door to start talking about growth when you're not just focused on weaknesses. If you have more opportunities to correct those actions, naturally it's going to be how do you cater and play to your strengths and how do you make sure you accentuate your strengths so you're even better at what you do? How do you really groom those employees for growth? You've seen this chart from the Job One report as well as also the Job One webinar that our CEO Shane Evangelist gave a couple of months ago. And Now that we see this trend where we have a lot more supply of jobs, but not necessarily a demand, we see this growing chart where we have a lot more postings, but not necessarily a lot of applicants. So the focus has to come internally now. How do you grow your existing employees? How do you make sure you retain them? What signs do you show to let them know that we are an organization that values growth and development and values training, and we want them to really succeed here in this organization? Because the how competitive right now in the landscape is pretty difficult, as you can see here, with sort of less attractive benefits in the public sector. So this growing trend will only increase, and it's already here. The disparity between the two is already 37 percentage points that only looks to increase over the next couple of years. So given the realities of today's tight labor market, the focus on developing and retaining top talent is critical. A big thing that we'll probably cover in a future webinar is succession planning. That's sort of the big sort of topic du jour now, that's sort of growing with a lot of the retirements from the baby boomers. What are we doing right now to reskill our employees and focus on grooming them within, rather than trying to recruit from outside the organization, because we're having more difficulty really attracting that top talent? What can we do with the talent that we have internally to groom them for the best possible job? The fourth trend that we see is, this is where you really play a pivotal role here. What can you do in HR to really empower your managers to develop their employees? Managers are a big multiplier effect on any organizations. They have the influence over their teams. So their team's performance is directly correlated with really how good of a manager, how effective of a manager do you have. And manager training here is going to be really, really critical. Do they have the tools? Do they have the framework to make sure that they are able to motivate, coach, and develop their staff? Do they have all the content that they need, and they have all the training that they need to make sure they have those same tools to translate to their staff? So we are really making sure that this burden, I wouldn't even say burden, but like this responsibility doesn't fall solely on your shoulders in HR. It's something that you should really collaborate with managers, because they also share in this responsibility of grooming their employees. For our fifth trend, very closely linked as well, training that creates value for the organization and the individual. So a lot of times, from talking to a lot of customers, really researching when we were launching Learn last year, we really want to know what their current training processes were. And a lot of times it was a lot of just classroom, in-person training, sort of one size fits all. We offer these training classes and we just hope that people sort of attend. But communicating and advertising that was a little bit difficult for a lot of our customers. What we see now then is, as managers become more involved, as they're having more continuous performance conversations with their employees and are really thinking more of a growth and development mindset, really making sure that the training that they recommend is more tailored to that specific employee. Really focus on their specific strengths and focus on the areas of improvement, not necessarily because these are weaknesses, but these are areas where if they grow and develop those skills, their chances of being promoted and accelerating in their career is that much higher. So we really want to make sure that the training now is a lot more focused, which really only happens if you have sort of more training opportunities available to you. So I think I might actually have a couple of poll questions related to this. So let me check the videotape here. First poll question that I actually did want to ask before we continue. This was actually related to the first slide, but honestly, a little forgot about it. But still very much keeping on topic is, do your managers conduct one-on-ones with their direct reports? Answers are yes. I also give a couple answers that I know I've heard before in the past, which is, we certainly ask them to, but we don't really know if they are. We've trained them to, and we're seeing some improvement. Honestly, we don't know. We hope so, but we don't really know. And no, we're pretty sure that they're not. Despite everything that we tell them, no, they're still not doing that, based on some of the conversations you hear from employees when they're reporting sort of any issues. Little known fact, one of the main reasons why employees leave organizations, can you guess what it is? It's their manager. So if you are hearing a lot of reports, oftentimes it's centered around who their direct manager is. So knowing that, do you know in your organizations if your managers and employees are having an ongoing dialogue throughout the year? All right, interesting poll results here. I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results. Pretty good, decent. I would say, 30% said yes, we do ask them to, but we honestly don't know if they actually are doing that. 27% said yes, they do, but then 19% also said no, we're pretty sure that they're not doing that consistently, which is kind of what I expected. Maybe sort of a mixed bag here in terms of how managers are conducting one-on-one. All right. So sort of keeping with the training now sort of slant of our presentation, how are we sort of linking, performance management with learning and development? So we know now that as managers are being more involved in the process, they are finding more opportunities for growth and development, and they're giving sort of more tailored training opportunities for their employees. How to really combine that sort of micro learning and traditional training that we've seen. So again, from a lot of our customers that I've spoken to throughout the couple of years, a lot of their training is also a lot of classroom based. But we're seeing now that really retention, especially to make sure that you're productive on the job, is really you have to have training that's on the go, that's accessible anywhere at any time, and you really want to focus on those micro learnings, those learnings where it's only a couple of minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, so they are able to sort of go back to their work. How much time do you have to sort of allot, traveling somewhere to an on-site training that lasts anywhere between 2 or 3 hours, and how much are you actually going to retain that afterwards? What we've seen a lot of our customers do is they are starting to, not supplant, but they're trying to also, corroborate and really supplement that sort of in classroom training with more online training. So let's say they do have these sort of big training sessions where they have outside vendors come in, talk to employees and train them over a course of 2 or 3 hours. But then afterwards, they have online materials that are sort of more micro learning bite size, that's anywhere between 5 to 10 minutes, that they can sort of push out to reinforce that material to make sure that their employees are actually learning that. So you can certainly do that with like focusing on single topics, easy to absorb format. A lot of times what we'll possibly do with this webinar is take all of these trends and make this into also maybe potentially micro learning for you as well. And then if you are sort of creating any online content, making sure you have at least one of those 1 to 3 quiz questions to make sure that your learners are sort of absorbing that material. So as you can see here with the quote at the bottom, micro learning fosters a 50% more engagement in learning and really make sure that your employees are motivated. And here's another quote from the Journal of Applied Psychology. Learning in bite-sized pieces makes the transfer of learning from the classroom to the desk 17% more efficient. And for those folks who still remember their college days, myself included, it's been a while for me, but imagine trying to cram all of a semester's worth of material in sort of one night and having to sort of digest that versus those sort of continuous bites. View sort of like learning as the same thing with performance management. You want to make sure it's doled out in bite-sized pieces and not sort of consolidated and sort of just dumped on you in sort of one sitting. So just like with performance management and those performance conversations, we want to make sure that learning is also doled out piecemeal as well in sort of manageable bites. So before we move into our last trend, I do want to ask a couple questions about training specifically. So first question is, in your organizations, so we have a lay of the land, which best describes your training offerings right now in your organization? Do you mostly have in-person training? You don't really have any online options? Do you mostly have in-person training? Maybe you have a few online content providers. Maybe you have a mix between in-person and online options from multiple vendors. Maybe you have a mix between in-person and online training, but you only have, let's say, one LMS or one sort of provider for your online training. Or are you mostly just doing online training now from one or several vendors? You don't really do a lot of sort of classroom in-person training. All right, go ahead and close the poll here and the results. Share them with everyone. So 41% said it was the middle section here, mixed between in-person and online options from one or various vendors. So it looks like any possibility you have for training, you're taking it. Whether it's in person, whether it's online from one or more vendors, any opportunity you have for training, you're making sure that's in your organization. And then followed closely by maybe it's mostly in person. that resonates with me a lot, also from a lot of the Learn customers. I think still right now, I think around like 70% of their training offerings is still classroom based, and now it's like their first opportunity to have more online training options, and then a mix between in-person and online training, but just from one vendor. Perfect. So before I talk about the last trend, I do have a couple more poll questions because we've spoken a lot, or at least I've spoken a lot, about the importance of managers and how well trained they are in the organization and what an effect and impact it has on the rest of your workforce. So the next couple of questions really asks, do you conduct new supervisor training? So anytime someone is promoted to be a manager, they're going to have direct reports for the very first time. Do you provide training for them? Options are, we have a formal program. Yes, we kind of do informally upon request. Maybe they're a little bit worried, so they ask us for any sort of advice or guidance. No, but it's part of our initiatives. It's part of our ongoing objectives and initiatives. We just haven't gotten to it yet, but we definitely would like to eventually. Or at this time, no, it hasn't even been planned even yet. So right now, no. What would you say is the state of your new supervisor training? All right, go ahead and close this, share the results. Interesting, pretty evenly split. 34% said yes, you do have a formal program, but also 35% said no, you don't have really anything right now, but you would like to eventually. So there's definitely a need for it here. And maybe are you just lacking the tools to have sort of that, in-person training or that new manager training? Like, what's sort of stopping you from having that, new supervisor training? Maybe it's just initiatives and competing priorities and resources, as is always the case in any organization. So next question is very, very similar, but do you have ongoing training for managers? So let's say you do have that new supervisor training really focused on your new supervisors who have never managed before, but do you have any sort of reinforcement for your, how do we call them? Our problem managers who maybe have historically and consistently had some issues and have gotten some reports from their team members. Do you have any sort of ongoing training to reinforce all of those elements and all of those topics that you cover in sort of new supervisor training? I mean, this is also a great way for managers to learn new skills to also develop as managers and become sort of senior managers and senior leaders in the organization as well. So even though it's really vital and important to have new supervisor training, ongoing training for managers, I think, is also just as important. Let me share the results here. So 36 said no, we would like to eventually. But interestingly here, the who has a formal program has definitely gone down. And for ongoing training for managers, it's more informal at this point, really upon request from supervisors, or maybe you in HR are sort of seeing some trends that you would want to address. All right. So speaking of trends, segue, the last sort of trend that we really see to really closely link performance management and learning and development is really improving your data and reporting capabilities. How do you know what to train them on if you're not measuring it? How do you know what to really focus on if you're not measuring, the right things? And how do you know what those measurements are? What are those attributes? How do you know, are they being completed accurately? Can you track that? Can you track completion rates for various entities, whether it's competencies, skills, sort of training requirements? So if you don't have any of those tools at your disposal, how do you know where to focus your sort of training initiatives going forward? So really improving the data and reporting capabilities within HR, so you have more of the insights to know where to sort of allocate resources and allocate the investment, especially since you are sort of business partners in the organizations. How do you really enact sort of a business plan and really tell your executives that we have to focus more training in these areas because we find this to be the areas where we have the most opportunity after a performance evaluation cycle? So the last two last two poll questions I have for you today are really, well, the first one is related to reporting. So based on this last topic of reporting, which reporting would really add the most value to you and your organization? Is it tracking evaluation completion rates? Is it being able to aggregate and look at trends for scores and ratings for your workforce? Is it really to identify where the areas of strengths and the opportunities for improvement are in specific skill areas? So not necessarily what the overall score is, but we want to know, do we have a communication problem? Do we have a problem about teamwork or some of those soft skills? What are those areas that we really want to focus on as an organization? Is it tracking sort of completion rates, or is it other? If you're voting for other, we'd love to know what other means for you. So what are those sort of data and reporting capabilities that would really have the most positive impact for you and your organization? This is pretty much a landslide, so I'll go ahead and close down the poll and share the results. 77% said really identifying areas of strength and opportunities for improvement. That's really the key area where you want to see, and that honestly is the link between performance management and learning and development. How do you, at the end of an evaluation process, find those areas of strength and opportunities, and then how do you pivot to make sure that you are providing the correct learning and training opportunities to make sure that you're shoring up those strengths and shoring up also those opportunities for improvement? So the very last question that I have for you today is, are your performance management and training and development processes linked? How closely linked are they? It's either no, we don't really have a good link because we have a paper evaluation process that doesn't really connect with a lot of the in-person training that we do. Maybe it's somewhat, maybe you have a mix because you have online evals but in-person training, or you have paper evals but online training. Or maybe you do have online evals and training, but you're using two different systems, so there's not a really cohesive or way to really connect the two in the best possible manner. Or maybe you do have that sweet spot of now you're able to take everything online, have everything under one system, so you have those two systems communicating with one another, and it's a much more organic process with having online evaluations and training sort of in the same system. So a lot of our webinar today is, where are you right now, and what are some opportunities that you can make to improve this connection and this link between performance management and training and development? So I'll go ahead and close down the poll and share the results. So pretty overwhelmingly, 57% said no, they're not really linked right now because we have a paper evaluation process and we mostly have in-person training. So it's really hard to get all of that data to sort of figure out where we should focus our investment in training and development going forward. And then 20% did say somewhat. We do have online evals, we do have online training, but right now we're not even using the same system, so it's hard for them to even talk to one another to really make sure it's more cohesive. Followed by 11% said somewhat. We have online evals, but we still only have mostly in-person training. All right, so we've covered a lot of material for you today so far. So we're going to end with a couple of things. First, some recommendations on all of the trends and sort of the information that we've covered today. So before I jump into the product and show sort of a live demo of some of the features for both Perform and Learn, one of the things that we want as a takeaway is really try to embrace as best as you can in any sort of small way the new approaches to performance management that we spoke about today. So how can you instill more frequent performance conversations with your managers and employees? How do you show them the value of those one-on-ones and really hold them accountable to being a manager and having those one-on-ones? How do we ensure that your managers are focused on the development of their employees and really focus on their personalized growth and their career and how to focus on those strengths and make sure that they're promoting the positive aspects and the accomplishments of their employees to make sure that they're motivated? And then really what we were speaking about towards the end, especially with a lot of the data and the reporting, how do you leverage technology, or really how can you better utilize the technology that you have to make sure that you're capturing those notes more effectively throughout the year and you're fostering more of those development and training opportunities, especially micro learning. We see here that employees that train on mobile devices, again, where you can access training anywhere and anytime, they see the frequency skyrocket by 42%. So to distill these two even further and more simply, your best bet, train your managers, both new and existing, to be effective coaches. It really starts with your managers. If you can get them on your side and collaborating with you, your work is that much lower that you have to do to make sure that your entire workforce is trained. You want to make sure that your managers are allies, but in order for that to happen, they themselves have to be properly trained as well. And you really want to establish that closer link between performance management and training and development. So with that said, I am going to jump into our live demo and really just show you, like, if you were to use, an online system, let's say for both performance management and learning and development, what that would look like to really harness a lot of these takeaways that we've spoken about today. So let me just jump into our environment here. Oh, and I've been signed out, of course. So let me sign back in. All right, so first I'm going to be signing into PE here. This is our performance management tool. So as a manager, one of the things that we always like to foster is that continuous feedback. So on the dashboard, aside from the tasks, we have a list of our direct reports. We want to make sure that we are constantly engaging with them via one-on-ones. So what we have is a feature in the system called journal entries. Journal entries are a great way to, again, promote that continuous feedback throughout the year, promote those accomplishments. Maybe for one of my direct reports, Will, I want to say, great job articulating the topics on today's presentation, right? And let's say that helps him with his communication skills. So one of the things that you can also do is sort of tag, communication skills as well on like their performance evaluation. And let's say I want to quickly share that with the employee as well. So again, I save this for myself so I can remember this going forward, but I can also share this with the employee and let's say maybe their manager to make sure that they know that I'm like acknowledging the great work that they've done. So giving them that positive reinforcement throughout the years. So journal entries are a really great way to do that. We also have capabilities where you can email journal entries. So in case you're not able to sign into the system, maybe you just want to type up a quick email and shoot it off into the system and have that saved for the employee that you can reference going forward. This is also a great way to reduce and eliminate that recency bias, because if you're logging these journal entries throughout the year, you can refer to them on the actual performance evaluations. From an HR administrative perspective, one of the things that I think you've sort of acknowledged as a big pain point is just the tracking, how to make sure that the visibility and the transparency of where people are in the process is available to you. So like with an online system, you can easily see all the areas, like where are all the bottlenecks right now in the approval process of our evaluations, where are the overdue tasks for signature or a proven signature. So if I want to figure out who has all the overdue tasks right now, who are waiting on signatures for these evaluations, I can easily do that with very, just as you saw here, just 2 clicks in the system. And if I wanted to, one of the things you can do in an online system is you can just send them a reminder email. So we have ad hoc emails that you can send out to these specific folks, as well as self-generated emails as well, automated email reminders and overdue notices that keep them on track. Let's jump into a rating form. As an employee, one of the things that you can also do in the system is you can have check-ins throughout the year. So aside from those journal entries, if you want to make those a little bit more formal, you also have the opportunity to have journal check-ins that are sort of periodic throughout the year, whether it's monthly or quarterly. So I'm going to actually find Will's evaluation, and let's going to fast forward to sort of the end of the year. Let's say I've been having continuous one-on-ones with my direct report, logging those journal entries, filling out those check-ins. Once I'm actually in the performance evaluations, let's say for communication, I really want to make sure, I want to capture and make sure that all of the comments are very specific and they have everything throughout the entire year. So here are all my journal entries for communication. I can quickly add them to substantiate my ratings here. So here are ones that I did back in January, back of last November, as well as the one that you just saw me use today as well. So for customer service, let's say, Will is excelling in customer service. I want to know why he's excelling in customer service, or maybe he's, not just meeting expectations, but maybe there's growth necessary for, customer service. These are areas where I can also refer to any check-ins that I have, or any reviewer entries, or any writing assistants to help substantiate my comments. And then for judgment and decision making, maybe I want to know, Will has actually done a really great job this year of recruiting members for his team. What has changed in the past year where now I'm really rating him as a superior? One of the links between, a performance management and learning and development system is you can easily view that person's training to really see how they've grown over the past year. So if I go into our learning management system and look at Will's record, I can see that he's taken courses on uncovering implicit bias as well as lawful hiring, which has really improved how he's built up his team and really improved his sort of judgment and decision making. And I can sort of put in here that he's taken the necessary training to do well in this competency. And again, for team player, to make sure that your managers are substantiating their ratings, notice that for anything rated as superior, they have to put in comments here, and they can't just submit the evaluation as well. So we see here that maybe there are some areas for improvement, maybe around customer service, maybe around personal effectiveness. So one of the things that I can do as a manager is not just, again, focus on the past and the weaknesses, but focus on the strengths and the areas of improvement. So opportunities for advancement for Will, or the training section here, I can see that I've already given him some training on how to provide better performance feedback, or how to provide difficult feedback with his team members. I want to make sure that he's also growing as a manager now that he has a new team. So I'm assigning him this training. But based on his performance evaluation and the development conversations we've had throughout the year, I also want to make sure that he's focused on customer service. So I'm going to look for training related to customer service, and I want to sort of add that here, the role of customer service, looking for things that are really short, maybe 15 minutes, that micro learning as well, to make sure that's added to his record. One of the things that we also saw was, just personal effectiveness. So maybe I want Will to focus on some time management skills. So again, right from the performance evaluation, I can easily look for anything related to time management and find those sort of brain bites, those quick courses, whether it's 8 minutes, 10 minutes, and quickly add that to his training so he's enrolled into those courses. So as a manager, my focus on him is developmental and making sure that I'm having those continuous conversations and providing the most accurate feedback. Last thing that I want to show here in Perform are the reports. This was overwhelmingly your response on where you really want to see the most reporting. How can we identify those areas of improvement and identify those areas of strength? So aside from just having a dashboard with a lot of operational things of when things are due, what things are overdue, you have things like a performance rating report where you can see the distribution of scores throughout your organizations and focus on those areas of strength. Who are those high performers and who are those low performers in your organization, and what can you do to sort of bring them up? I do want to draw your attention, though, to the item ratings report. I think this is a really great report to use in conjunction with the learning and development department, because you can clearly see here, this will let you know what are the most highly rated competencies in your organization. This is sort of ranked from highest to lowest. Where are we shining as an organization, and what are some areas maybe around critical thinking that we want to give some more training opportunities as well? So if you even want to filter this and see what the distribution is, maybe you want to look at a pie chart instead of a bar graph, and you want to use sort of like this scale. Based on your own rating scale, what are the areas that really need improvement, or what are the areas that are unsatisfactory right now in the organization? What are those competencies? It looks like, attendance and punctuality is one of them, and possibly also innovation. So what are some areas where we can provide more training to make sure that people are coming to work on time and giving more creative opportunities and more training so they're more innovative as well? So being able to take data and really find out and hone in what are the areas where we need the most improvement. It looks like, again, attendance punctuality is really high here, or maybe it's people management or job knowledge. So looking at the data to identify those areas of strength, and then on the learn side, making sure that you are providing those opportunities to your employees as well. So in a learning management system that's closely linked, you want to make sure that you have in your course catalog areas for those soft skills, for those business skills, whether it's Microsoft Excel, maybe it's Microsoft, PowerPoint, but those time management skills, project management, emotional intelligence. We hear so much from our customers about wanting more training for those soft skills. And that's really based on the analysis that they do based on what they're hearing from their managers and after their performance evaluation cycle. So, NEOGOV within Learn, we offer 1,000 courses, online content, a lot of that micro learning that we spoke about today, where there's a lot of different topics around leadership and management. How do you train your managers to be better managers? How do you focus on a lot of those soft skills? And then we also recommend that we've seen a lot of customers start doing is they're starting to create more learning plans. So learning plans are sort of a collection of courses. So imagine creating a learning plan for new supervisor training that teaches them how to, give performance feedback, how to have difficult conversations with their team members, how to make sure they have those lawful hiring practices. Also accentuating their growth. Maybe you want to tailor a very specific learning plan for your employee based on what they want to aspire and what they want to be in your organization. That's another area for you that you can use Learn for. And then the one last thing that I'll sort of shout out in our Learn module is something that our customers have really found a lot of use for. So let's say today's presentation, once you have a copy of it, this is something that you want to reinforce for your managers. So I'm going to look for a presentation that I created around performance management. So let me scroll down here. So let's say you take today's presentation, you want to quickly create that into an online course. You can easily do that in our Learn module. You can really upload all of the slides. We'll change them for you in terms of like these slides, so you can have a timer set, so make sure that your employees are actually going through the functionality at a timely manner. You can sort of add any videos and sort of quiz questions. So again, you can put in all the slides that you covered today as a way of sort of supplementing maybe in classroom training or the online training that they have. So this is always at their disposal. So here are some sort of elements we have for the custom course builder. You can add pictures, obviously. You can add videos. You can reinforce it, let's say, with a training tutorial if you're using one of those modules. And again, making sure that they retain it, making sure that they have those quick quiz questions. So this is something that I've created literally in like 10, 15 minutes that you can easily do on your end to reinforce a lot of that training material. So that's sort of a quick sort of demonstration of some ways that you can use an online system to, again, improve the connection between performance management and training. We have a couple of minutes left. I know we went a little bit over on time, but we do have 3 minutes left if you do have any questions or comments. So feel free to let us know. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. I'll gladly call on you if you want to sort of opine in. I'm looking through here the questions pane to see if there's anything. We did have a lot of people participating in poll questions, FYI. So we have over 100 attendees. Just know that all the slides, there will be a sort of a presentation. This will be saved. So not just the recording, but the slides as well. There is PHR credit for this seminar. I believe that was in the invitation on the NEOGOV website as well. I think it's worth 1 PDC, I believe, for PHR, SPHR recertification credit. This is recorded again, so it will be posted on the NEOGOV community as well as the NEOGOV website by tomorrow. Any questions on the material? I know we covered a lot. Did sort of a crash course and a big sort of overview on where we are right now in terms of like the state of the union of performance management and how to sort of make some improvements. Any questions? 2 questions? What are they? The bottom? KT. Oh, so we have a question. When you evaluate, is there a way to make the numbers not visible? Yes. So there is a way where you can actually hide the scoring settings. So you're not displaying that to employees. Maybe you still want to collect that information from HR, maybe for any sort of potential rankings. But you can have sort of non-scored ratings as well and hide that. All right, here. Most of the questions are still, if this is being recorded, will you have access to the slides? Answers to that is all yes. Let me see here. We do have feedback on more feedback about numbers not being that meaningful. So again, like what does a 3.17 mean versus a 3.07? So again, substantiating those and really giving those qualifiers of what it means to meet expectations or exceeds are probably more beneficial than the numbers themselves. All right. Well, it doesn't look to see if there's any questions, but again, this will be posted on the NEOGOV community and the NEOGOV website. We thank you all for joining today's webinar. We covered a lot of ground here, and we hope that you can sort of take back and make some small improvements in your processes to really make sure that your employees and your managers are engaged. So thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.